I would let Chiamaka take over straight away from there, and she will be talking to you about graduate assistantship and what you should expect, how you should the questions and all those things, and what professors and all those things expect. So, Chi, take over from there.
Thank you, Bennett. I feel like you've actually answered all the questions because a lot of the questions you spoke about are things that they even ask in graduate assistantship roles. Like when I was interviewing for the urban cohort, I give me a minute, let me.
I hope my screen is gone right now. So you're on the screen now.
So like when I was interviewing for the urban cohort. So for some context, I'm in something called the urban cohort at Miami University. And what we do is we help so people who are training as teachers and want to teach in urban communities. So when they say urban here, they're talking about economically disadvantaged communities. A lot of the time, these communities are communities with people of color, not all the time. Okay. So what I do is that we just help these students. They go out, they teach in these communities. We connect them with schools. We hold seminars for them. And I can remember when I was in my interview session with Professor XYZ, and they asked me about time management. They asked me why I wanted to be in that assistantship role. So I want to say you answered it, but give me a minute. So I think I want to start this by talking about common assistantships. I will rush through this and I will share this PowerPoint with you because there are links there that I put at the end, which you can click on and just, I guess, delve into the world of assistantships. So a lot of people go into this I interview days, I've realized without even knowing the assistantships, they're just like, for some people, it's like, let me just leave the country. Well, any department, any school that is giving scholarship, let's do this. So I understand that for everyone, it's not oh my God, I love student affairs and I want to do this. And no one is judging you. We have to do what we have to do, right? What we're here for is to help you. So the first one is rest life. I'm not going to go into the pros and cons of rest life. I just want to say, if you want to have a very soft landing in the US, you probably should pick rest life. That's all I'm going to say. Maybe if you have questions, direct them to Bennett in the comment section. So rest life basically is, you know how back home in university hostels, you have someone called a porter, right? I'm not sure what term is used in your own space, but in my university, it was called a porter or like a hall manager. So what you're doing here is a hall manager role, right? So you can see here overseeing residence hall, supervising assistants. There are going to be students who work under you managing community programs. You're going to be doing a lot of programming. So when we say programming, it's basically like designing events, activities. Think of it as a huge landscape. So we're not saying hall parties here. Sometimes it could be diversity programs. Sometimes it's to celebrate maybe Disability Month. Sometimes it's Asian Heritage Month. Sometimes it's just to it could even be programming to train your assistants on something you need them to learn. Maybe how to be more inclusive, maybe how to use a certain type of software. So it's just an all-encompassing role. It's a lot of work, but I hear it's very rewarding for those who are genuinely interested in this. I want to give a disclaimer. I feel like if you know that you don't work well under pressure, then maybe don't pick rest life because it will stretch you. So moving on, academic advising, which is where Bennett is. Doesn't mind me sharing that. So basically assisting students with course selection, academic planning. I'm thinking of what I feel like in Africa, a lot of people say academic advisor, right, Bennett? I feel like that's the term they use. It's a mixed term, but basically what I wrote on the screen is what they do. Again, I don't want to spend too much time because I want to go into the interview questions because our time ends by 3:30. Career services, so basically helping people navigate internships and jobs outside of school, career fairs, and all of that, mock interviews, student activities and leadership. You can see here planning campus events. There are school-wide events that sometimes it's not reliant on like departments. It has to be something that the wider school body is planning. So you'd be involved in that, or maybe even liaising with departments to make sure that they're getting it right, like they have the appropriate finances, documents, and all of that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, which is, I spoke about like Asian Heritage Month, there's Black History Month, there's Disability Month, just those types of things. And there are offices that also sometimes measuring like the school climate when it comes to diversity and equity, sometimes ensuring that maybe DEI reports coming in, that someone is addressing those things. They work with a lot of departments. So you could also choose a position in this. There's admissions and enrollment management. I'm not going to touch on some of these things. I just want you to know. So you go into this knowing what you're going to pick and why you're picking it. You can see that under all of these things, there are skills that you can gain there. And if you have these skills already from a job that you've done before or just experience, for everyone, it's not going to be I worked as a teacher or I was in student affairs back home in Nigeria or Ghana. Sometimes it could be I was an event planner, right? And you have to, of course, find how to connect that with why you want to work in student activities and leadership, right? But just keep your eyes peeled for these skills gained at the end of it, because it's something that you can use to defend why you want to be in a certain position or what you think you're going to gain out of it, right? So orientation and first year programs, there's a lot of emphasis on making sure students are well as students settle in. I don't want to say they're taken care of, because we like to see them as people who have autonomy and agency, so not as kids to cater for, right? So just helping them settle in and all of that. There's athletics and recreation services, some supporting student athletes. So I remember when I interviewed for one school, I think the assistantship I got there was academic advising, but for student athletes, which is a mix of departments, right? So sometimes these assistantships are not necessarily just one thing. Sometimes it's a mix of two things. So it's just something to, I guess, think about that when you're picking something. I'm not going to touch on the last one. There's frat and sorority life, there's community engagement. Again, I'm going to share this document with you so you can read this on your own time, right? Um, Now I'm going to share some points when interviewing. I feel like Bennett touched on some of them, but because we're specifically talking about graduate assistantships, he has mentioned several times that DEI is an important thing. I want you to forget everything you've read in the news about how America approaches certain situations or certain conversations, maybe about diversity or about race or whatever. Um, and just put it at the back of your mind that a lot of schools, despite the policies or the laws or whatever that is happening, there's a huge emphasis on diversity, inclusion, equity. And there's something called inclusive language. I'm not going to say it is the right way to speak. It's just a more appropriate way to communicate in the space that we're in. Because you have to realize that you're coming into a place where there are people from all over the world who have lived different lives, who come from different financial situations, who are just viewing life differently, right? If you, like I said, I'll share this. If you click on this thing here, you will see that I have attached a document that shows you how to use words appropriately to address certain demographics, right? So when they're interviewing you, make sure you're using inclusive language, inclusive examples, and be mindful of how you introduce your ideologies or belief systems into conversations. Um, I will give an example. Please forgive this. I'm a religious person, but I've learned from experience that something that usually constitutes a barrier when people are interviewing is when they start talking about religion and then they don't know the boundaries of discussing that in an interview setting, right? So I'm not saying it's bad to talk about your religion. If it's something that comes up, fine. But then when you're starting to say, I cannot relate properly with this student because I am XYZ, right? Or we don't believe this, it is in our religious book or something like that. Those are things that just can be an issue. The second point is, what does your department believe in? I remember a school I interviewed with. I'm going to say the name of the school because I think that was a very brave thing they did. There's a lot of discussion currently in the US over diversity and equity and all of that. And this department, University of Denver, I believe, clearly stated there, they even had a diversity report, which I mentioned when I was writing my statement of purpose. They said, in my own words, we don't care what is happening. We care about diversity. We care about our students. We care about equality. And that's what we're focusing on despite what's happening, right? So for me, having a conversation with people in that department, that was something that was at the fore of my mind, that I don't have to hide how I feel about DEI issues. There are some schools where you need to tone that down a bit. But then just research what does your department believe in. So in departments, I don't mean SAHI or HISA, right? I'm talking about athletics and recreation services. I'm talking about academic advice, and I'm talking about just those things that I listed when we started this slide. Study the department of your assistantship and what you're applying to. So that's where you would see the leadership. I saw a lot of people asking, who do we interview with, right? You probably see the coordinator of that department or the director or whoever. A lot of the time, these people sit in those meetings, and you would just get a sense of who they are, the kind of research they are doing, what they are interested in. If you look at that, feel free to go to their LinkedIn. Nobody is stopping you from that. That's also important. Research the team. If you can find a profile of the team members, sometimes these people sitting in meetings. Like when I was applying for Miami, I didn't just apply for the urban cohort. I also interviewed for residence life. I interviewed for first year orientation. And I remember Rest Life team, there were like 5 or 6 people sitting there, right? So research the team. I don't know who drew this on the slide. I know I saw someone here, but it's fine. It's not me. I just want to deny it. If they didn't ask, please don't bring something up unless it gives you an edge. It's very important that whatever you're talking about is whatever you're talking about. Don't, in Nigeria, we will say don't misyan, right? Just don't go to Z when they're talking about A. A lot of the time, these are the things that get you into trouble because you go off point, or you just start, sometimes those things even make you disconnect from the main topic, and then you start becoming confused. And then, so just stick to what they're asking you. Don't get yourself in trouble. Don't show desperation is point 6. Please don't be saying, please, I need to leave my country. It's very important to me. I want you people to take me. I beg you in the name of God. Of course, we know that no one is going to say that, but you can express these things unknowingly, maybe in your body posture. I know this is over Zoom, but just like Bennett said, be confident. That's what matters, right? And ask questions after the interview. I'll get to that later. Now, there's something called oh my God, who drew this line? Is distracting me. There's something called the STAR method of interviewing. I will touch on it really quickly. So situation, task, action, and result. Describe the background, explain the specific responsibility. What was the point of maybe, say an example I gave here, the team faced low attendance, right? And then the event you were organizing was to increase student participation in events, right? Which is the task at hand. The action, like what did you do to increase this participation, was by conducting surveys, collaborating with student groups, and adjusting event times. And what was the result of that? So I want you to think of this for at least most questions you answer. Some of them you may not necessarily follow this, right? Because again, you have to make sure you're not mechanical when you're answering questions. But think of I think this is how they even advise people to write resumes nowadays, right? So just think of these when you're answering the question. I'll paste this and you can just go back and look at it. Now, possible questions. I tried not to be very specific when I was crafting these because um, you can see that they were there are over like 12 departments, and these are just the most common ones, right? Now, I don't want to start saying, okay, if you are in Rest Life, there's a slide for that. Let me show you. So this slide, I got like 4 departments and possible questions you could answer. Is something you can review on your own later. But for now, we'll touch on these ones. So why this assistantship? I'll give some context to my own responses, right? So this is not my first degree at Miami University. I was here for creative writing, also with an assistantship. And for my thesis, I did a research on the transatlantic slave trade and wrote a collection of poems, which required a lot of research. But in doing that, I had insight into the history of African Americans or the Black people, depending on who. So notice the way I'm using terms, right? African Americans, Black people. That's what I was talking about when it comes to inclusive language, right? And because of that, when I was interviewing for the urban cohort, I had a lot of background knowledge on why is there even inequality in education, and why do we need teachers to learn how to relate with these communities, to learn their cultural values, to learn social norms there so that they can integrate properly, right? So connect your experiences. So you see how I answered this question, just bringing that experience of I wrote this for my thesis. I have the theoretical knowledge. I was also an instructor. I don't like to call myself a lecturer because I don't feel like I got there yet. There's no PhD, right? So I was teaching composition and rhetoric, and then I taught creative writing in my final semester. And because of that, I worked with students, right? So for me, it wasn't just about, oh, allow me to do this because I love student affairs very much. It was that I had gained experience working with students. I had read student journals, which was something that we started doing during COVID. And those journals allowed me gain a first-hand knowledge of students' lifestyles, the things that were issues for them in the university. So imagine me answering this question in front of a Rest Life team, right? That I have first-hand knowledge into the issues students are facing. It's very easy to be in administration and not and just assume that, oh, students are having this problem. But someone has read the issues of students in their journals, which they were surprisingly very open to sharing. And I came into those interviews, whether with Rest Life or whether with first year orientation, because I also taught first year students, or with let me look at the time. Wow, we have just 1 minute. I'll rush through it. Or with the urban cohorts, just having some background knowledge. So for whatever your experience is, please make sure you pick relevant things for your assistantship role.
Sorry not to cut you, but you can go ahead. I think it will not cut, so go, just feel free. All right.
Okay, so please pick relevant experiences. You may have started a business that's maybe an agriculture business. I'm giving an example now. I don't know where this is leading, where you managed 5,000 cattle and everything, but then how does that relate to the role that you're doing here? That may have been a very big business where you were a big boy or a big girl, you get, but then that NYSC position, I think in Ghana is called the National Service, where you taught in a school, maybe more relevant experience to back up your point of why you want to be in education or in an education fair, which is student affairs, than maybe I had a big farm with 5,000 cows, except of course you can translate some skills you've learned there into whatever you're defending yourself for. Also remember that whatever you wrote in your SOP, just like what Bennett said, don't forget that when you're answering any of these questions. If your assistantship is in the urban cohort, or if you pick the urban cohort, or if you pick diversity and inclusion offices, then you must be able to argue from your SOP that, of course, I mentioned that I was very open to equality, I was very open to this, and that's why I'm pursuing this, right? And then share career and organizational goals. So what is the big picture of all of these things that you're doing? Are you planning on becoming an activist if you choose DEI? Do you want to have a long-term career in hostel management? Do your own research and find out what is the apex of this field. Of course, not everyone is aiming for, okay, I want to be head of all the hostels at Miami University or something. But just have a plan. You don't want them to ask you, and then all you have a knowledge of is where you are right now, assistantship. What is the plan? right? Do you want to contribute anything to the field? So I remember answering this question with my supervisor, and I talked about how just based on how I've done research all my life, or I used to write, I focused on equity and all of this. For me, it's a long, I'm not giving you the exact response I gave her, but I just shared how I was very interested in addressing inequality, especially amongst Black people, especially Black women. I gave an example of how I don't want to go into tribal things right now, but just being marginalized in certain spaces, both home and abroad. My experiences, even in the United States as a Black person, and how it was something that and how, Ben, please can you help me mute Grace?
Okay.
Yes, so just that kind of thing. Now, the second thing is, what would you say makes you a good candidate for this position? Again, your experience. And this is where you bring in your skills, right? Okay, so you managed 5,000, a 5,000 cattle farm, right? Did you learn people management skills there? Did you learn conflict resolution skills there, right? What did you learn there that you think would be relevant? Again, this brings it back to make sure you look at the website for the assistantship. Some of them is just like the urban cohorts. I would not call it a department per se. So it's not like rest life, right? It's just I guess a sub, I don't know how to describe it, but just make sure you look at the website so that you would understand the values, the goals of this department, and find relevant skills that align with that. Now, I wrote here, do you want to explore new roles or interests? For there are people who, like me, I was an instructor, right? I wasn't exactly a student affairs person, but then talking about how, because I had interacted with students and I had seen the lives, so it's very easy to dismiss the work of student affairs professional. Just disabuse yourself of whatever the educational system is in your country, where you're like, okay, so we have a dean of student affairs, we have VC, we have the bursar, and what else? There's a lot that is going on behind the scene, and those things are things that are prioritized here in the US. So you can say, okay, so I was a teacher at Ogbomoso Grammar School, but then because of the interpersonal relationship that I had with students, it's a society that allows these things, unlike how the US is. And because of that, I just gained interest in how maybe without proper academic advising, these people could make mistakes in like picking courses or even like calculating their CGPA, just having an awareness of that before graduation. So things like that. What motivates you in your work? You will keep seeing here that I talk about experiences. I want you to know that if you're, Bennett has said, you don't make sure you're not being generic in your responses. You can talk about your skills. You can talk about, these are things that you can use ChatGPT to come up with, right? So if you're, even if you are lying, right? Even if you're lying and you make up a scenario, I'm not saying that you should, but I'm just trying to be as realistic as possible, right? Um, have a ready scenario, possible ready scenario for each of these responses. Make sure that you're giving a student-centric approach. So center the student, or if it's a situation where you haven't worked with students, make sure that your responses are centering the customer, right? So an example of this is maybe what motivates your work, and you worked in customer service, right? It could be I loved seeing customers happy. That's not an explicitly deep response, right? But it just shows that it's not all about, oh, I just wanted to make money, or oh, I was looking for a job when school ended, right? So find how you can center students, or you can even tie your experiences to something that can help students. So, okay, I had some interaction with a student in Nigeria, my cousin, my family friend, and I realized that for people maybe migrating outside the country and having to face certain situations, they didn't have anybody that was helping them. And I just from me being in school and having issues with maybe just as a student outside of my academics, I felt like this was something I was interested in. And you can then translate that to, okay, so people that are moving here, you're interviewing for the diversity, equity, and inclusion office. How can you be someone who, I guess, contributes something to making sure that first-year students, international students, are having a good life on campus, free of, well, I can't exactly say free, but people that are just facing, I guess, issues with inequality or discrimination or bias and all of that. So the next one, can you describe a time when you worked, excuse me, to achieve a meaningful goal or outcome? What role did you play in making a difference for that student? Again, I think I wanted to tie this to having a student-centric approach in your responses. So this question, I don't know that everyone can answer it if they didn't have like maybe a teacher student or a student affairs teacher interaction, right? But it's just something to have at the back of your mind. I feel like they would ask you this based on whether you say that maybe I have been a teacher or I was bursa or this, but it's just something to think about. Or what role do you think you can play? They can even ask you this for the future. So imagine you are working with a student. What role can you play in making a difference for that student? You have to realize here that the things that matter, communication, empathy, right? Making sure that you respect each student's agency, making sure that you respect their who they are as a person. So we're going back to DEI now, and those are the things you should just think about when you're answering this. How can you incorporate all of them to making sure that whatever that student is asking for, whatever help they're asking for, support, not help, whatever support they're asking for, that you can help them with that. Now the next one is cultural competence. Heavy on the DEI, right? What areas of social justice are you comfortable with? And what areas would you like to experience? What do you think of DEI? If you have any strengths, excuse me, there's a document I've shared with you. It's NASPA functional areas. I want you to go and look at this document, because not only will it help you pick your assistantship, because then you do a self-evaluation to say, is this something I'm even interested in? I don't even want to go into, am I competent enough? Because there are some things you look at and you say, nope, this is not for me. I don't want to do this, right? But also it would help you answer the question of your strengths, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is just a 1 hour, 30 minutes meeting, which we've gone over time. But please look at that document and then find possible strengths. Have you been an advocate? If there was a protest, if there was a protest, is there something you did? Were you making placards? Were you doing this? I'm not saying you should expose certain points of your life which you are uncomfortable sharing, and you have to be careful when you're talking about these things too, so that you don't present yourself as a rebellious person, right? But then share, share any, excuse me, please share. Can you mute yourself, please? Yes, please share any. But please, can you help me mute?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so please share any strengths or experience you have in the field. If you were someone who maybe had an interaction with someone who was disabled in a certain way, and you were able to help them maybe achieve their academic goals, that is an example you can share. Use appropriate language. There's a link here that you can check out. You would get that later. Acknowledge that the landscape is changing. What are you learning? Show self-awareness. So in a lot of the countries that we're coming from, I'm speaking for myself on this, I don't want to generalize. There are certain things that we would just say it's banter, right? Oh, we're just bantering. Oh, this is not a serious thing in our country, but here it's a serious thing. And one way you could show they understand these things, because they have related with students from all across the world in many SAHI or HISA programs. So if you can say, okay, this is what I am learning. This is what I know about social justice. This is what I am learning. This is what I'm unlearning. And this is where I feel like I can make some progress. I feel like that is something, and I feel like maybe Bennett can confirm that it's something that we continuously do in our programs. You have to learn, unlearn, relearn, right? So if you show that you are trying to learn in a specific part of this DEI thing, just answer the question with tact, please, so that it's not coming across as, oh, I'm very, very ignorant in XYZ. That would speak for you. Study the history of the field. So how has DEI worked in whatever assistantship you're picking? If it is academic advising, read the history of maybe racism in academic advising, disability services in academic advising, read the maybe religion in academic advising. You'll be surprised that a lot of these things have some way they have played out there, just so you can also back your responses up with history, with current affairs. A lot of the time, those things would even save you, especially if you don't have experience with it, right? So yeah, what is your personal commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Again, share examples. If you don't have examples, share things that are happening in your country. If you're a Twitter person who has some input on this, if you've started a movement, if you started a foundation, if you've worked with a student in your school, and DEI can even apply to offices, right? So if in your office, there's a certain way things are done that excludes certain or that marginalizes certain groups of people, and you've stood against that, those are examples you can give, right? They understand that not everyone is coming from student affairs, and they're open to just hearing how you've handled things. Also, something that really, really stands out is there a current area DIYs that is problematic in that field? So, for example, you're talking about academic advising. In one of our classes, we had one of our classmates speak about how she's an academic advisor, I believe, and she talked about how there are not really a lot of I think was it Black academic advisors or international academic advisors, and how because of that, when international students come in, just because sometimes there's a cultural gap in communication and knowing how to communicate with people from certain cultural spaces or environments can create a bridge in the work you're trying to do. So imagine you're having a conversation with a white person who is asking you, oh, how was your day? Oh my God, it was so sunny, and things like that. And in your mind, you're thinking, Madam, this is not my problem. You can't even discuss your problem with them, because imagine if you're having maybe immigration issues and you don't feel safe enough to express that, right? So just that's just what I'm talking about here. Is there a way you can pitch yourself as someone who, I don't want to say that will solve the problem in the field, but that can bring maybe a new perspective for thinking of that problem, or addressing that problem? That's what I mean by, is there a current area that's problematic? Show me your knowledge. Why are you interested in that? Tell me your experience working with students from diverse backgrounds. So again, it can be your office, it can be with people in your church, it can be with people you pass on the streets. It can even be in the way you're thinking and you're evolving. Just what is your experience mentally? What is your experience physically? Make sure again that you reply with tact, so you don't put yourself in a weird situation. Now, collaboration. A lot of student affairs departments thrive on collaboration. You're working with another department. For example, I work in the urban cohort. So imagine if these students outside in these urban communities need some help thinking about what life is on campus, right? That's the part where we would organize maybe a seminar, or we would ask someone from first year orientation to come and speak with some of these students, or we do our own research, we collect information and go and share with them. You're not an island. No one is an island in student affairs. And because of that, they would like to understand how you collaborate, right? So I wrote here, can you share an experience where you and a supervisor or a co-worker had different opinions on a decision or policy? How did you navigate the situation? So start by describing the situation. What was the difference in opinion? How did you navigate it? Was it through maybe communication? Did you have to ask a supervisor to step in? Did you have to persuade the person to see your own point of view? A lot of the time, I feel like a safe way of talking about this is always reaching a compromise, because it can be very tricky balancing that act of I'm not an overbearing person. That's why I was sharing my own ideas and insisting on it. Or I'm not a pushover and I had to call my supervisor, right? So if you don't have a lot of experience in interviews, a good way to go about this is just tell a story where you reached a compromise. So you shared some of your ideas, they brought some of their ideas, and you guys found a middle ground, right? Stay neutral, don't badmouth anyone. Please don't say that person was very silly, they don't have sense. You get stay neutral when talking about, because again, it's showing them how you would handle collaboration. And don't forget that when you're dealing with people outside yourself, people
Of
outside
course.
him, which you have built a rapport with. Sometimes there could be tension. So be very careful, please. Explain the resolution. So how did you resolve that issue? What was the way forward, right? What did you learn from that situation, and how does it translate into the assistantship that you're interviewing for? So again, if maybe that was the first time um, you were learning conflict resolution, which would be really weird. But if you were, maybe that was the first time you were learning about it in a educational setting. So for instance, you're an account officer in a school and you had to do something with another department. That's that's something you could talk about. So be really specific when you're highlighting those skills. I learned conflict resolution in an academic setting. I learned conflict resolution when it comes to dealing with a superior. I learned conflict resolution, just things like that. How does it translate to the department? So what's important is conflict resolution in maybe first year orientation, right? It could be helpful when dealing with parents, right? Because um, some parents are they want the best for their kids. So you have to find how to approach that with tact, right? It could be something that is relevant for talking to a supervisor in the department, just things like that, right? The next one is, can you share an example of when you or your team worked effectively with another department to achieve a goal? So this is not about different opinions, right? It's about collaboration, right? So make sure you give a tangible example. Again, I don't want to give an example because we come from such a wide array of professions and backgrounds. So find a relevant example for yourself. Highlight the skills there. So again, I'm talking about conflict resolution. Did you learn negotiation? Did you learn good communication skills? Just something again that is relevant to the assistantship you're talking about. Focus on the student or the customer. So for whatever you guys were working on, how did it impact the people at the end of the chain, which is the customer or the student? Don't make it about yourself. Don't make it about the other departments. Here, departments or student affairs is really heavy on who are we doing this for? The students, right? And if they sense that you're someone who for you is about, oh, I just want to make money. I'm not saying those things are bad, but again, remember this is an interview. I just want to make money. Oh, I'm just here because why are you asking me why I want to be in this position? Because I'm looking for a job, right? You can't think about it that way. So those are just things to translate here. Why did you do this for the organization and teams? Again, just think of that big picture for whatever examples you're giving. I'm not going to talk about the last one. I feel like it's these ones I've addressed above have kind of answered those. Leadership. So tell us about a time when you showed leadership. A lot of the time, I feel like I don't want to generalize, but just from what I've seen here at Miami University, a lot of departments will not micromanage you. When I came in as an instructor, we had some
What is micromanagement? Will you explain that?
micromanagement.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's when like your supervisor is uh, has not given you the autonomy to like do things, figure things out for yourself, be a leader on whatever project they've put you on. They are looking at everything you are doing. They are checking it. They are saying you have made this mistake, change this. Even if you use small a instead of big A, there's someone that in 5 minutes, someone has noticed that thing. It's not seen as a great way of managing people or departments. Excuse me. So they want to know that you can take charge of a task, you can take charge of a department. So when I was an instructor again, we had a course. Nobody sat with me in class. They just told me, well, now we have done like a 5 or 6 weeks course with you. Feel free to go into the class and mess up if you want. Right? That's not what they said, but for me, it was really scary because I'm international. I had to think about my accent. I have only ever taught kids in Nigeria, and that was like a secondary school, but I had to figure it out. Nobody was sitting with me, no one was telling me anything outside of what they taught me in theory, right? So they just want to know that you can manage things by yourself. So you may get leadership questions. Now, again, they're not expecting you to talk about, oh, I was in education or whatever. Leadership can cut across anything. I used to be how do they call it? Head of department in customer service. I worked in experiential marketing and I handled like projects by myself. So I wasn't the HOD, but I had autonomy over a project and I managed it. I used to run a business, so leadership, right? So even if you're an entrepreneur, you can translate those stories into answering when you should, like telling about a time when you showed leadership. So I wrote here, what are some leadership skills? Communication, emotional intelligence, delegation, decision making, right? What was the impact of this time that you showed leadership? Did it increase sales? Did it help people be more inclusive? Again, so those are just some ways to answer that question. Again, for every question you're answering, please make sure you tie it to whatever your assistantship does, right? So don't just pick a random leadership scenario, right? If it is something that has to do with, so maybe the urban cohort where I am, I could talk about leadership in making sure that there were people, maybe, I think I had a scenario where someone was being a Black student was being marginalized in some way, right? And I had to step into that situation and make sure that people went away with the knowledge that they're not supposed to be doing that. And then, of course, talking to the Black person about empowerment. Do you need to talk to someone about it? So it's leadership in the classroom, but then that could be a good example for addressing this. Now, the next one is, how would you describe your supervisory style? They'll tell you there's no right or wrong way to talk about this, but I think a good way and a good safe space, a good safe response should be collaborative and supportive, right? Those are good ways. So, of course, I've said collaboration is a big thing in the department. Supportive doesn't mean that you are a pushover and like you're in a supporting role. That's not what it means. But again, I said here we're very heavy on supporting students. We don't say help, we say support. So you're a supportive person, you're a collaborative person, which could mean that across you being a supervisor, working with people, even working with other supervisors, that you're someone who they can trust to work with people and be supportive, like, okay, let's do this well, and even support or just work with students. Flexible is also a good thing to say. You're flexible, which shows that you're not rigid. As a supervisor, you're someone who can have a member of your team come to you with, don't say subordinates, please, just say team member, right? A member of the team come to you with ideas which can make you maybe change whatever you had asked them to do, right? So show that it's not just about, you're not authoritative, right? You're flexible enough to listen to other people, flexible enough to see that there are other ways of doing this, flexible enough to even well, I think that's that, but basically just flexible. And also being flexible means that you can learn and unlearn. So it goes past your supervisory style to even when we're talking about diversity and equity, right? Also show that you're outcome driven. I feel like you should address this with tact so that it's not a situation where outcomes are the only things that are relevant to you. Because again, when you're being outcome driven, you have to think about empathy. Are you pushing your team so much to get to an outcome that you don't even realize these people are human beings with lives? They are very heavy on work-life balance here. So please, for whatever you're doing, make sure that you're not coming across as somebody who doesn't care about that, even if that's not your reality. Now, the next one is, what has been the most challenging supervisory issue for you? And how did you learn from that experience? I feel like when you're addressing that question or when you're sharing that story, focus on things that show that you're very collaborative, supportive, flexible, right? Don't badmouth people when you're telling that story. Don't talk about how um I just wanted I just wanted this, and when this was done, that was all that mattered. We made sure that the organization made like 10 million naira. But you're not talking about the lessons you learned from that challenging experience. How did that change your way of thinking as a supervisor? How did that benefit the whole team? Did everyone learn something from it? Make sure that you're not contradicting the supervisory styles you've picked. So you said that you're a collaborative person, but then the story you have talked about as your challenging issue is something that shows that you don't even want to collaborate with another person. Someone from another department was trying to give some input and you shut them off, right? Just so you could address that challenge. Even if the output or the outcome was good, it kind of just cancels what you said. So they will know that you're lying, right? Excuse me. Okay, I've talked about collaboration, leadership. Now, other questions, how do you manage your time? Bennett has addressed that. Please talk about Google Calendar, Notion, Outlook, whatever you use. It's good to mention technology, like Bennett has said, because there's a lot of technology used here. You could even, I remember having a conversation with my supervisor. That was before she became my supervisor. When I talked about, oh, I use like Google Calendar. I knew to say that because I had talked to someone else who interviewed for the program. And I also said I also have like a task list where I can tick off tasks. And she was like, oh, I do the same thing too. And we bonded over that, right? So we're not saying don't say you use paper and biro, but if you can infuse technology into that, that's good. What are strategies for maintaining work-life balance? Bennett has talked about that. How do you know when you're getting stressed or overwhelmed? There are certain departments where they will stretch you so much that you would question why you picked that department. I just have to be realistic with you. Um, and you have to know by yourself, like you have to get to a space where you know I am stressed, I am getting overwhelmed. Now they're not asking you is so think of it like when they're asking for your strengths and weaknesses, right? You have to answer the question in a way that doesn't throw you under the bus. Like I'm get when I know I'm getting stressed when I have shouted at like two people. Right, that's not a good answer. You could say, I know I'm getting stressed when it becomes more difficult to maybe reflect on lessons of the day. I know I'm getting stressed when it becomes hard to um, when I have to remind myself every day of why I chose this assistantship or why I chose this job. There's a lot of empathy here. So even if you say that, people think of it like, oh, this is someone who does self-reflection. This is someone who sees it as a priority. And because of that, they know to take themselves out of stressful situations and go recuperate, right? So when you're answering that question, it's also good to talk about how you address being stressed. So I can't self-reflect anymore, or it's getting more difficult. And because of that, I have to talk to my supervisor and I have to maybe take some hours off the job. We don't want to say months, we don't want to say a week, some hours off the job, maybe a day, just to go think about what I'm doing here, reassure myself. Like Bennett said, they are not telling you not to go and do some self-care. I've had a class where they ask, what do you do for self-care? And I watch Netflix. I will put on Squid Games and watch it for the whole day. I won't do any assignments. I don't care at that point. And that just helps me refresh myself, right? So there's that. Any programming knowledge. So again, I explained before, programming can be planning events. a lot of programming is planning events, right? It can be planning how an event, so think of event not as people in one spot, but think of event as a series of activities happening across a department or across campus. So I did an internship with the DEI office when I was in creative writing, and programming for them was collaborating with the library to make sure that they display books for Disability Month. Programming was drawing up a social media schedule to address posts on disability. Programming was reaching out to maybe disability services or the accessibility office to see if they were doing any program they could collaborate with them on, right? So if there's anything you've done which involves planning activities, planning events, you could use that as an example of programming. Again, refer to your departmental website to be sure that what you're giving is an example that can translate into that department, right? Assistantship question lists. These are not necessarily SAHI websites, but they are just sites that I've looked at the questions and I say, okay, yes, just based off my own experience and talking to other people, a lot of these questions get asked during assistantship interviews. I would share the link with you later. You can click on them and go through them. I'm not sure how come people are on this slide with me because I'm seeing like names appearing and I saw someone draw something, but well, questions to ask after, follow up to the discussion. So if the discussion has gone like my urban cohorts discussion had gone the route of how people always assume that urban is talking about black, right? So when they say urban music, I think in the late 90s, early 90s, when you hear urban music, it's an urban music. MTV Base is an urban music station. You think, oh, they're playing hip hop, they're playing rap, right? Those were stereotypes that people have. So we had started talking about how when you say urban communities, people just interpret that to black people and how urban people can be other people of color, right? And that was where my follow-up discussions came from. So you don't have to put yourself in a box. Um, if the discussion has gone a certain way and questions can be that your follow-up questions can fit into that discussion pertaining to your assistantship. Let it not be a situation where you guys have started talking about, maybe the interview has ended and somehow you guys started talking about spaghetti and then your follow-up questions is about, oh my God, I like spaghetti. Do you put tomatoes on your own? I'm not saying you cannot have that just as banter after the interview, but don't get so carried away that you're not now doing the needful, right? Ask about diversity in the department. Bennett talked about that. Ask about teamwork and collaboration, just to show that you're interested in the team. You could direct that question to anybody on the team. It doesn't need to be the head of the department. Ask what a typical day is in the department. So tell me about a day in your life in the department. And these things differ because different people play different roles. But again, it just shows that you're interested, right? And these resources that I'm sharing with you, the first one is inclusive language. It's a document that talks across like sexuality, gender, pronouns, talks about race and all of that, and just the way to express yourself when you're speaking with or to people in those groups. The functional areas, you will learn about that if you get into the program. I don't want to delve into that, but again, you would going through it would help you see like skills, would help you reflect on possible skills, things that you're going to learn in the future, foundational knowledge you need to come into. And I feel like I know I didn't really give examples like specifics like Bennett did, but if you look at this document, you will say, oh, so for academic advising, they need this skill. They need this skill. This skill is important. What have I done in my life where these skills are where these skills have come to play? And I feel like it would help you pick your assistantship. And then there's a student affairs job guide, which would help you learn what is expected in SAHI or HISA job interviews. I made a disclaimer there, not a one size fits all approach. So please read the room before applying these tips. So for example, if this document is telling you, make sure, I think I saw something there where they said, make sure you don't laugh unnecessarily, like just ha 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 ha. When I was talking with my supervisor, I remember we laughed so much, like we're just, it was like we had known each other for a long time, right? Oh my God, how is someone drawing on this? So again, not one size fits all, but just for you to have an idea, because the US job market and things they expect is very different from maybe Africa or some other place. In an African interview, I don't think I would ever start doing. Oh, I used to act like a know-it-all. I know that, but um, what would I do there? I don't think I would talk about work-life balance because I feel like a lot of people, even though they say they would appreciate that, they would translate it as, oh, you are very lazy. Work-life balance in a company that's not your father's own, right? But the way you would answer that question here is different, right? So let me share the link, and I think I am done. I wish all of you the best of luck. I'm sorry we went over time. Give me a minute. I just put the link in Zoom. After
Yeah.
is therapeutic wisdom. Yes, thank you. So thank you very much. I hope this was helpful. How do I
Yes,
disable this?
thank you very much for that. I mean, you didn't waste our time at all because this is very insightful and very informative. And I don't think someone is wasting your time if the person is trying to help you gain a lot of knowledge and all that. You know, you can never waste time learning. So